My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I rediscovered myself in the midst of a suffocating marriage and an unexpected passion. It all began on an autumn afternoon, when the wind was blowing dry leaves along the sidewalk of the small square in our neighborhood. I was sitting on a bench, watching the world go by, trying to escape the monotony that my life had become. My marriage to Tom had already lasted 15 years, but lately, it seemed like we were living parallel lives under the same roof. He would come home from work, sit in his favorite armchair, and turn on the television. Dinner was served in silence, broken only by the sound of the news or some random program. Sometimes, I wondered if he even knew I existed anymore. It was in that square that I met Gerald. He was a gentleman in his 60s, with graying hair and a gentle smile that lit up his green eyes. That day, he sat down next to me and started talking about the pigeons gathering at our feet. His voice was soft and melodious, and for a moment, I completely forgot about all my worries. In the days that followed, I began to frequent the square more regularly. Gerald was always there, as if he were waiting for me. We talked about books, music, politics, and even the weather. It was refreshing to have someone who really listened to me, who was interested in what I had to say. As days turned into weeks, I realized that something was changing inside me. The feeling of being alive, which I hadn't experienced for so long, began to awaken. I started to dress up more, to smile more frequently. Tom didn't even notice the change. One afternoon, Gerald surprised me with a bold proposal. "Sarah," he said, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, "what if we ran away together? Just for a few days. To somewhere far from here, where we can just be ourselves, without the shackles of everyday life." The idea was crazy, of course. I was a married woman, I had responsibilities, an established life. But the more I thought about it, the more tempting it seemed. The possibility of escaping, even if just for a brief moment, from the monotony that had become my existence was irresistible. I spent sleepless nights, weighing the pros and cons. On one side, the security of my marriage, even if dull and loveless. On the other, the promise of adventure, of feeling alive again. The dilemma consumed me. Finally, after weeks of reflection, I made my decision. On a Friday, I left a note for Tom saying I was going to visit my sister in the countryside, a lie that ate me up inside, but seemed necessary at the moment, and left with Gerald for a small coastal town. The days we spent together were like a dream. We walked hand in hand on the beach, had candlelit dinners, talked for hours on end about everything and nothing at the same time. Gerald made me feel desired, valued, alive. Every touch, every look, every whispered word rekindled a flame that I thought had gone out long ago. However, as the days passed, an uncomfortable reality began to set in. As wonderful as it was to be with Gerald, as alive as I felt, there was a part of me that knew this couldn't last forever. The guilt over what I was doing to Tom, even though our marriage was in shambles, began to weigh on me. It was on a starry night, sitting on the porch of our guest house, that I had a difficult conversation with Gerald. He listened attentively, as he always did, while I explained my conflicting feelings. To my surprise, he smiled with understanding. "Sarah," he said softly, "from the beginning, I knew what we had was temporary. But that doesn't make it any less special. You gave me back a bit of the youth I thought I had lost, and I hope I did the same for you. But your life, your real life, is waiting for you. And you need to go back to it." His words, though painful, were true. I realized then that Gerald wasn't just a lover, but a catalyst for my own journey of self-discovery. He helped me realize that I was still capable of feeling, of desiring, of living intensely. I returned home with a heavy heart, but also with a new perspective. The routine was still the same, Tom still preferred the company of the television to mine, but something inside me had fundamentally changed. In the months that followed, I stayed in touch with Gerald. Our meetings in the square continued, but now with a new dynamic. They were no longer furtive encounters between lovers, but deep conversations between two friends who shared a special secret. I began to seek changes in my own life. I went back to studying, something I had abandoned years ago. I made new friends, picked up old hobbies. Gradually, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been dormant for so long. Tom, surprisingly, began to notice the changes. One day, as I was reading a book on the couch, he turned off the television and asked me what was going on. It was the first time in years that we had a real conversation. I didn't tell him about Gerald, of course. Some things are better kept secret. But I talked about how I felt invisible, about how our marriage had turned into a silent prison. To my surprise, he listened. And more than that, he agreed. That night, we cried together. We cried for lost time, for wasted opportunities, for the love we had let grow cold. But we also cried with hope, with the possibility of a new beginning. I can't say everything magically resolved after that. Real life doesn't work that way. Tom and I still have a lot of work ahead of us if we want to save our marriage. But now, at least, we're trying. As for Gerald, he continues to be an important part of my life. Our meetings in the square are moments I look forward to with anticipation. He taught me that it's possible to feel alive again, that it's never too late to rediscover yourself. Looking back, I realize that my story isn't about infidelity or betrayal. It's about a journey of self-discovery, about learning to value oneself, about finding the courage to seek happiness. Gerald was the catalyst, but the real change came from within me. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a different woman from the one I used to be. A stronger, more confident, more alive woman. And that, more than any romance or adventure, is what really matters. I don't know what the future holds for me. Maybe Tom and I will manage to rekindle the flame of our love. Maybe not. Maybe Gerald will continue to be a dear friend, or maybe our paths will separate. What I do know is that, no matter what happens, I will never allow myself to disappear into the monotony of life again. Because now I know that I have the power to choose. To feel alive. To be happy. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson I've learned throughout this journey. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on that bench in the square, I watch people passing by and wonder how many of them are living lives of quiet desperation, as I was. I wish I could tell each of them that it's never too late to change, to rediscover yourself, to live. My story isn't a fairy tale. There are no guaranteed happy endings, no magical solutions to complex problems. It's a real story, with all the complications and nuances that real life brings. But it's a story of hope, of growth, of courage to face the truth about ourselves and our lives. Gerald taught me that love can come in many different forms. Sometimes, it's a burning passion that consumes everything. Other times, it's a deep friendship that helps us find ourselves. And sometimes, it's the love for ourselves that we need to rediscover. Tom and I are still working on our relationship. There are good days and bad days. Days when I feel like we're making progress, and days when it seems like we're back to square one. But the important thing is that now we're trying. We're communicating, listening to each other, really seeing each other for the first time in years. As for me, I continue my journey of self-discovery. I went back to painting, something I loved to do when I was younger. My improvised studio in the garage has become my refuge, a place where I can express all the complex feelings I've experienced in recent months. Sometimes, I paint Gerald. His gentle face, his understanding eyes. Other times, I paint Tom, trying to capture on canvas the complexity of our relationship. But mostly, I paint myself. The woman I was, the woman I am, the woman I'm becoming. There are days when I wonder if I did the right thing. If I should have told everything to Tom, if I should have run away with Gerald, if I should have stayed exactly where I was. But then I remember that there are no easy answers in life. That each choice we make shapes us, transforms us, leads us to new paths. What I've learned is that life is made up of moments. Moments of joy, of sadness, of passion, of boredom. The secret is not to try to live only the good moments, but to learn to embrace all of them. Because it's all these moments, together, that make up the rich and complex tapestry of our lives. Gerald taught me to appreciate these moments. To savor them, to live them fully. Tom, in his own way, is learning to do the same. And me? I'm learning to create my own moments, to not depend on others to feel alive. There are days when I go to the square and Gerald isn't there. At first, this made me anxious, worried. But now, I see it as another opportunity for growth. I sit on the bench, watch people passing by, and feel grateful for every moment we shared. Sometimes, I think about what would have happened if I had made different decisions. If I had ignored Gerald that first day in the square. If I had run away with him forever. If I had confronted Tom years ago, when our marriage started to cool. But I've learned that there's no point in dwelling on what-ifs. What matters is the now, and what we do with it. Tom and I decided to go to couples therapy. It's not easy. There are sessions where we leave more hurt than when we entered, where old wounds are reopened and long-buried pains come to the surface. But there are also sessions where I feel like we're really connecting again, where I see glimpses of the man I fell in love with so many years ago. Gerald, in his wisdom, encourages me to keep trying. Love, he told me once, isn't something that just happens. It's something you choose, every day. It's waking up in the morning and deciding to love, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. His words stayed with me, echoing in my mind in the most challenging moments. And I realized that he's right. Love, whether for a partner, a friend, or ourselves, is a choice. A choice we make every day, in every small gesture, in every word spoken or unspoken. There are days when that choice is easy. Days when Tom surprises me with a bouquet of flowers or a special dinner. Days when Gerald and I laugh until we cry, sharing stories and dreams. Days when I look in the mirror and really like the woman I see. And there are days when that choice is almost impossible. Days when old hurts resurface, when the temptation to fall back into old patterns is almost irresistible. Days when I doubt every decision I've made. But what I've learned is that it's these difficult days that really define who we are. It's easy to love when everything is fine. The real test comes when things get complicated. One of the most surprising things I've discovered on this journey is how the people around us can surprise us. Tom, who I thought I knew so well after so many years together, has shown me sides I never imagined existed. A few weeks ago, he surprised me by suggesting we take dance classes together. I was shocked. Tom always hated dancing. But there we were, stumbling and laughing as we tried to learn the basic steps of a tango. It was during one of these classes that I had an epiphany. As we moved awkwardly across the floor, stepping on each other's feet and apologizing between laughs, I realized that this was how our relationship was. We were relearning how to move together, to synchronize, to trust each other to lead and be led. We were no longer the passionate couple dancing perfectly in sync at our wedding. But we were also no longer two strangers sitting in silence in front of the television. We were something new, something under construction. And there was a unique beauty in this process of rediscovery. While our married life was taking hesitant steps towards a new harmony, my friendship with Gerald continued to flourish. Our meetings in the square were now punctuated by deep discussions about life, love, and the meaning of it all. He had become my confidant, my spiritual guide in a way. One day, as we walked through the square, Gerald surprised me with a question. "Sarah, do you regret it?" The question hung in the air for a moment, heavy and loaded with meaning. I knew exactly what he was referring to. I stopped, looked at the autumn sky, and took a deep breath before answering. No, Gerald. I don't regret it. I can't regret something that made me grow so much as a person. What we have, transformed me in a way I could never have imagined. He smiled, that gentle smile I knew so well now. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. You know, at my age, I've learned that regret is a luxury we can't afford. Every experience, every choice, even every mistake, shapes us. The important thing is what we do with it. His words reverberated in me, echoing a truth that I was only beginning to understand. Every step of this journey, no matter how difficult or confusing it may have been, brought me here. Made me who I am today. As we continued our walk, I began to reflect on all the changes that had occurred in my life in recent months. It wasn't just my relationship with Tom that was evolving. I myself was changing, growing, becoming stronger and more confident in who I was. I went back to work part-time, something I had abandoned years ago to dedicate myself fully to the home. At first, it was scary. I felt outdated, insecure. But over time, I rediscovered my passion for my profession. Each small achievement at work was an affirmation of my ability, my independence. Tom, surprisingly, was my biggest supporter in this new endeavor. He offered to take on more responsibilities at home, something he had never done before. Seeing my husband, who previously barely knew where the plates were in the kitchen, preparing dinner while I finished an important report, was a scene I never imagined I would see. As the months passed, I noticed that my relationship with Gerald was subtly changing. It was no longer that burning, forbidden passion from the beginning. It had transformed into something deeper, more lasting. A true friendship, based on mutual understanding and respect. One day, sitting on our usual bench in the square, Gerald told me about his late wife. It was the first time he had spoken about her, and I could see the emotion in his eyes as he described the love they shared for decades. You know, Sarah, he said, his voice choked with emotion, when Marilyn passed away, I thought I would never be able to feel anything like that again. I spent years in a kind of emotional limbo. And then, I met you. I felt my heart tighten at his words. He continued, you reminded me that it was still possible to feel, that there was still beauty in the world. It wasn't the same kind of love I had with Marilyn, but it was equally precious. You brought me back to life, Sarah. Silent tears were running down my face as he spoke. I realized then that our connection went far beyond a simple attraction or a passing affair. We had, somehow, saved each other. Gerald, I began, my voice trembling, you did the same for me. You showed me that I could still feel, that there was still more to life than the monotonous routine I was stuck in. You gave me the courage to seek more, to rediscover myself. At that moment, we shared a long, emotional hug. It wasn't a lover's embrace, but one of two souls who recognized each other, who understood each other deeply. When we separated, I saw in Gerald's eyes a mixture of gratitude and a hint of sadness. Sarah, he said softly, I think it's time for me to leave. I felt my heart sink at his words. Leave? What do you mean? He smiled, that gentle smile I knew so well. My daughter invited me to live with her in another city. She's expecting a baby, and, well, I think it's time for me to be a present grandfather. The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. The idea of not having Gerald in my daily life was too painful to contemplate. But at the same time, I knew it was the natural course of things. Our lives were following different paths. When are you going? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. At the end of the month, he replied. Sarah, I want you to know that the time we spent together was one of the most precious periods of my life. You gave me a new purpose when I thought my life was already over. I swallowed hard, fighting against the tears that threatened to fall. You did the same for me, Gerald. I don't know how to thank you for everything. He took my hands in his eyes shining with emotion. There's no need for thanks between friends, Sarah. Just promise me that you'll continue to live fully, that you'll continue to seek your happiness. I nodded, unable to speak. We sat there, in silence, our hands intertwined, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors. It was a bittersweet moment, full of gratitude for what we had and sadness for what was coming to an end. The following weeks passed in a blur. Gerald and I met several times, each encounter charged with the awareness that these were our last moments together. We shared memories, laughed about our adventures, cried about the impending separation. On the day of his departure, I went to the square one last time. Gerald was there, his suitcase beside the bench. When he saw me, his face lit up with that smile I loved so much. Sarah, he said, standing up to hug me. I thought maybe you wouldn't come. How could I not come? I replied, my voice choked with emotion. You changed my life, Gerald. I couldn't let you leave without a final goodbye. We stood there, embracing, for a long moment. When we separated, I saw that his eyes were misty, just like mine. Remember, Sarah, he said, holding my hands, you are stronger than you think. Braver than you imagine. Don't let anything or anyone make you forget that. I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned in and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. Goodbye, my dear friend. Be happy. And then, he was gone. I stood there, standing in the square, watching him walk away until he disappeared around the corner. A part of me wanted to run after him, beg him to stay. But I knew it wasn't right. Our time together had come to an end, and now it was time to move forward. I returned home that night with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of peace. Gerald had given me an invaluable gift, the courage to live fully, to seek my own happiness. Tom noticed my sadness when I got home. He didn't know about Gerald, of course, but in recent months he had become more attentive to my feelings. Is everything okay, Sarah? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I looked at my husband, really saw him for the first time in a long time. I saw the man I fell in love with so many years ago, the man who was trying to reconnect with me. And at that moment, I made a decision. Tom, I began, my voice trembling slightly, I think we need to talk. That night, I told Tom everything. About my unhappiness in recent years, about Gerald, about my journey of self-discovery. It was a long and painful conversation, punctuated by tears and moments of heavy silence. Tom was hurt, of course. There were moments when I thought our marriage would end right there. But as the night wore on, something surprising began to happen. Instead of pulling away, Tom began to open up too. He talked about his own unhappiness, about how he felt trapped in a routine that suffocated him. He talked about the fear of not being good enough, of losing me. And, to my surprise, he talked about how he had noticed the changes in me in recent months and how it had inspired him to want to change too. When the sun rose, we were exhausted, emotionally drained, but also closer than we had been in years. We didn't solve all our problems that night, far from it. But we took the first step towards a new beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, Tom and I worked hard on our relationship. We had difficult discussions, moments of doubt and fear. But we also had moments of deep connection, of rediscovering each other. We started doing things together again. We went out for dinners, went to the movies, planned trips. Small gestures that we had forgotten long ago came back into our routine. A cup of coffee in bed in the morning, a loving message in the middle of the day, a spontaneous hug when coming home. At the same time, we maintained our individuality. Tom went back to playing guitar, something he had abandoned years ago. I continued painting, transforming our garage into a small studio. We learned to balance our time together with our personal interests. And Gerald? Well, he remained in my thoughts. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the square, I can almost see him beside me, smiling gently. I miss our conversations, his wisdom, his friendship. But I know he's happy, living his new life as a grandfather. Occasionally, I receive a postcard from him. Brief messages that always make me smile. I hope you're living fully, Sarah, he writes. And I am. I really am. My journey is far from over. There are still difficult days, moments of doubt and insecurity. But now I face them head-on, with the strength and courage I rediscovered in myself. Tom and I continue working on our relationship. It's not perfect, no relationship is. But it's honest, it's real, and it's growing every day. We've learned to communicate better, to really listen to each other, to support each other in our individual and joint journeys. As for me, I continue my journey of self-discovery. Each day brings new challenges, new opportunities for growth. Sometimes, I find myself thinking about how my life could have been different if I had made other choices. If I had run away with Gerald, if I had left Tom, if I had remained in my comfort zone. But then I remembered Gerald's words, there are no easy answers in life. Every choice we make shapes us, transforms us, leads us to new paths. And I realize that I'm exactly where I should be. My story isn't a fairy tale. There are no guaranteed happy endings, no magical solutions to complex problems. It's a real story, with all the complications and nuances that real life brings. But it's a story of hope, of growth, of courage to face the truth about ourselves and our lives. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a different woman from the one I used to be. A stronger, more confident, more alive woman. A woman who has learned to love herself, to respect herself, to seek her own happiness. And that, more than any romance or adventure, is what really matters. Because now I know that I have the power to choose. To feel alive. To be happy. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson I've learned throughout this journey. My story is still being written. Each day is a new page, a new opportunity to live fully, to love deeply, to be authentically myself. And as I walk through this ongoing journey of self-discovery and growth, I carry with me the lessons I've learned, the love I've shared, and the courage I've found within myself. Because, in the end, life isn't about finding the right person or perfect love. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, about learning to love yourself and others, fully and truly. And that's what I'm doing, one day at a time.